Welcome, welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And here we are. So remember, we are talking now about the initiation of Aaron and his sons into the priesthood. And we're talking about the very first beginnings of this, which involved a 7-day process, which was repeated each day. And here we're going to finish up about that. So let's take a look at it. Umi petach ohel moed, and from the entrance of the tent of meeting, lo tetzu shivat yamim, you shall not go out for 7 days. In other words, they should be restricted into that area of the tent of meeting, that courtyard. They were to be there for the 7 days, ad yom melot yemei milu echem, until the day that completes or fills the days of your initiation. Ki shiv'at yamim, for 7 days, yimale et yedchem, you shall, in other words, yimale et yedchem means they should then participate in all the various ceremonies that are involved in initiating them into the priesthood. So they shall, I believe, and also this expression, Yamale Yedchem, it's an interesting idiom, and I think it means you shall be occupied in, essentially, right? You should be doing. Ka'asher asa bayom hazeh, just as was performed on this day, Tzivah Hashem, the Lord has commanded, la'asot, to do, l'chaper aleichem, in order to atone for you. So let's take a look at the Rashi here. Tziva Hashem lasot, the Lord has commanded to do. Kol shivat hayamim, meaning all 7 days. That's essentially the point he's making. That God has commanded them to do this all the 7 days. Razal Rabbeinu Zichronam Leracha means our rabbis of blessed memory. Darshu, they interpreted, right? They went further. La'asot ze maaseh para lechaper ze maaseh Yom HaKippurim. Okay, so remember they had to bring a bull by way of initiation, right? So that's so azotze, so they understand to do this, right? Maaseh para, that is what they have to do, okay? The chaper, when it talks about to atone, zim aseh Yom HaKippurim. That is what is done on the day of Yom Kippurim. So we'll finish this up, but the idea there is that Yom Kippur essentially is there to atone for the sin of the golden calf and what that represents. And of course, that was the nadir of Jewish history when they worshiped the golden calf. And of course, it's also very symbolic of a position that says, either the golden calf can certainly represent money, but certainly matters of the physical world. Ulalamed, and to teach, shekohen gadol, that the Kohen, the high priest, ta'un prisha, that he requires separation. Prisha means he has to be separated from the rest of the community. Kodem Yom HaKippurim, prior to Yom HaKippurim, prior to the Day of Atonement, Shivat Yamim, for 7 days. V'chein HaKohen HaSoref et HaPara. Okay, so I have a better understanding now. Likewise, the Kohen who burns the para, and here we're talking about, so the para here is not referring to the bull that a Kohen Gadol has to bring in order to atone. We're talking here, Maaseh Para means the ashes of the red heifer. So I'm going to put in a little note here, see if I can. There we go. Okay, okay, so the red heifer. That's what we're referring to here. So the The ashes of the red heifer that is mentioned in the book of Numbers, they understood to atone for the sin of the golden calf. And I think, but we also know that Yom HaKippurim is the day where God finally forgave the Jewish people for the sin of the golden calf. So they're all interconnected. Okay, so the what we're talking about here, okay, it appears that the Kohen who burns the ashes, who's involved in the burning of the ashes of the red heifer, has to be involved somehow. Whether he does that, I think it would be 7 days afterwards. I'm going to guess that, but likewise, there's an issue of 7 days. And of course, by and large, we're talking about the effectiveness of the temple service in atoning for the sins of the community and of the people, and possibly the world in general. Upetach ohel moed teshvu yomam v'alayla shivat yamim. So not only is it stated as a negative commandment, but it's stated positively, right? At the entrance of the tent of meeting, you shall remain day and night for 7 days. Ushmatem it mishmeret Hashem. So we'll see what that means, but it means, and you shall guard, right? The watch of the Lord tamutu, so that you do not die. Okay. So again, it has to do here, it would appear, with the specific service that is when it says Mishmeret Hashem, I'm understanding it to mean that all that God has commanded to be done is, as it were, a ishmar. Let's just finish the sentence. Kichen suveti, for thus I was commanded. That's Moses, of course, speaking to them. All right. So, v'lo tamutu, so that you do not die. Ha'im lo ta'asuchen. So, obviously, from the negative, you infer the positive, meaning that if you don't do this, lo ta'asuchen, hare, let's find it there. Here we are. Atem chayavim mita. You will be guilty of a capital punishment. That it's so important that what's going on here has such significance. And we come to the end of this Parsha. Vayas Aaron uvanav, and Aaron and his sons performed et kol hadvarim, all these things, asher tziva Hashem biad Moshe, which the Lord had commanded by means of Moses, through Moses. Vayas Aharon uvanav, and Aaron and his sons. Why is the sentence? But Rashi's basically telling us, Lagid Shivchan, to speak in praise of them. Shelo hatu yaminu small. They didn't turn left or right. They did very specifically what God had commanded them in every single particular. They participated and performed and were just meticulous about what they did in performing this. And in this way, they were preparing themselves and to cleanse themselves. And that's the idea of atonement, is that it's a spiritual cleansing. Judith.
Could you repeat? I'm realizing I can't remember exactly what you said. That's the point at which God forgives the golden calf.
Yes, that that the ashes of the red heifer, that commandment which is mentioned in Chukat in the book of Numbers, is actually an atonement. And of course, the specific mitzvah involves taking this perfect red heifer and sacrificing it and burning it and taking the ashes and using them to sprinkle to purify someone who has been in contact with a corpse. That the impurity, and of course the Torah doesn't explicitly mention what it comes to do, but the rabbis interpreted that as being an atonement for the sin of the golden calf. And there's some connection between idolatry, but in this, the idolatry of the golden calf and death. How essentially what the worship of the golden calf involves, all the issues there, right? In some, because it is so it's so in the opposite of of the spiritual element of life. It so denies in some ways the importance of the spiritual element and the essential element of this of our spiritual aspect, that it also represents mortality and death. That when you negate that side of your existence, that essentially what happens is you lose touch and you lose connection to immortality, to that part of you within you that is actually immortal, which is the spiritual side. So, and also, of course, the fact that the reason why Yom Kippur is when it is because if you calculate, when you calculate the amount of time that the Torah talks about from the moment that the Israelites worship the golden calf to the day in which God forgave the Jewish people for that sin, turns out to be on Yom Kippur. Is this
Ah,
is this helpful?
yes, thank you.
Okay, sure, sure. So I'm happy to say, uh, we've come to the end of our discussion of Tzav, and so in a sense, it is a milestone. And of course, happens to be the day before Erev Pesach, which is a Friday today. And so, in some ways, it's lovely that we can have this milestone at this particular moment. Any other comments before I stop recording? Okay. All right. All right. I'm going to stop the recording.